Hey guys, welcome to my new charcoal drawing video. So a lot of people who watch my videos have told me that drawing with charcoal feels hard. It's messy, it's unpredictable, and sometimes it feels like you don't really have control. Yeah, I do get that feeling. I used to hate drawing with charcoal as well. So in this video, I want to talk about charcoal a little bit. I'll try to answer some of the questions I get asked the most and show you how I personally work with charcoal to make it feel more manageable. And for this drawing, I want to try drawing a scene rather than focusing only on the portrait of someone. So actually, this is harder for me than my usual portrait work, because here I have to build the background as well, and not just do something random or abstract like I usually do. So in a way, this is something I've always wanted to do, creating more of a story with my drawing. So the first thing I want to answer is about my materials. And probably the most important thing for charcoal, at least for me, is the paper. So I like using paper from Canson, and this one here is Canson 1557. It's a fine grain paper. So fine grain doesn't mean it's super smooth. With charcoal, to make it stick to the paper, we actually need some tooth. So fine grain means there's a bit of roughness there, but it still feels smooth when you draw on it. And I find this kind of paper works really well for me, because I can do detailed, almost photorealistic work. But at the same time, if I want to draw rough, this paper can do that as well. So honestly, the brand doesn't really matter that much. As long as it's a fine grain drawing paper, you'll be fine. And to be honest, I've also drawn with charcoal on watercolor paper before. Even though the texture is way rougher, I can still work with it. I actually did a lot of realistic drawings in the past using watercolor paper, and there's really no bad consequence to using it. You can still draw smoothly on it, it just gives you a different texture in the final drawing. And about my tools, I actually keep things pretty simple. So I like using charcoal powder, and I apply that charcoal powder with a blending stump. This charcoal powder is actually DIY. I just sand my charcoal pencil and collect the powder from that. And for charcoal pencils, the one I use most is from Marie's. That's mainly because this is the brand that's most available in my local art store. So don't worry if you can't get this one. I've worked with other brands as well, like Derwent and Roni, and they all work great. You just have to be a bit careful when choosing the darkness, because charcoal pencils come in different darkness levels, and I personally like to use the middle one. And then the other really important tool is the eraser. So if charcoal powder is what I use to create shadow, then the eraser is how I create light. I like using a kneaded eraser and also the Tombow Mono Zero eraser. But again, if you can't find these, a regular eraser works just fine. And you'll also need some kind of blender. You can see my black blender around the middle left of the screen. That's actually just a regular makeup sponge. So yeah, usually girls have this kind of thing lying around. So if you don't have one, you can always ask your girlfriend, assuming you have one. So that's about my materials, so I hope that clears things up for you. And now, let's talk about why charcoal actually feels hard. So a lot of the time, it's not really about the tools, it's more about how we approach charcoal in the first place. One big reason is that we're kind of fighting the nature of charcoal. Charcoal is messy, it's unpredictable, it doesn't behave like graphite. And a lot of times we try to force it to be something clean and controlled, which usually comes from perfectionism. So we want everything to look right immediately. We want clean edges, nice transitions, and no mistakes. But charcoal just doesn't work like that. So when we try to control it too much, it actually starts to feel harder and more frustrating. And I used to do this a lot as well. I wanted everything to be clean too early and every mark to feel intentional. But with charcoal, you kind of have to accept that things will get messy first. And that mess comes with sad and happy accidents. And a lot of the time, those accidents are what make the drawing feel alive. So, instead of trying to avoid every mistake, it helps to let things happen a bit and see where the charcoal takes you. And once you stop trying to make it perfect right away, charcoal actually becomes a lot more enjoyable to work with. So another thing that makes charcoal feel really overwhelming is trying to draw everything, especially the background. A lot of times, we feel like if it's there, we have to draw every single detail of it. But that's actually one of the fastest ways to lose focus in a drawing. Because when everything is detailed, nothing really stands out anymore. So yes, in this drawing here, I do draw the background, but I don't really draw details in it. You can't actually tell what the background really is. It's not completely abstract, but it's also not descriptive. I like to think of it as simplifying the background, so I'm just drawing enough to support the subject. Just enough to make her feel like she's being somewhere. And when the background stays quite like this, the subject naturally becomes the focus. Another really common mistake is focusing on details too soon, before the big picture is even there. So instead of looking at the overall shapes, the values, or the direction of light, we jump straight into eyes, edges, hairs, and these small details. I see this a lot with my younger students as well. They'll start drawing details almost immediately, and the drawing usually feels off, even if the details themselves are not bad. So when I encourage them to slow down and focus on the basic shapes first, the drawing almost always gets better. Because once the big picture works, the details become much easier. So with charcoal especially, it really helps to block in the big shapes first, establish the values, figure out where the light is coming from, and only then start thinking about details. If the foundation is strong, everything you add on top will make more sense. And in this drawing here, I'm not drawing the details yet. I'm just trying to map out everything first, and once that's done, that's when I start adding the details. So this leads nicely into workflow. The order you work in actually matters a lot. For me, I always start with the big picture. I'm thinking about the overall shapes, the balance, and the main values. Once that feels solid, I move on to the important areas. In a portrait like this, that's usually the face. After that, I start refining things and adding details. This is where charcoal pencils come in and where I slow down a bit more. And only at the very end do I think about final touches. Small adjustments, slight darkening, or softening edges. Working this way helps me stay in control, and it also stops me from overworking one area too early. So big picture first, then what matters most, and everything else comes after. Once the workflow is clear, detail hierarchy becomes really important. Not everything in a drawing needs the same level of attention. In a portrait, the face is always the most important part. That's where people look first. After that, it's usually the clothes or any props around the subject. These help support the character, but they don't need as much detail as the face. And then last is the background. The background's job is not to compete. It's there to support the subject and help create space and mood. So when you control where the details go, you're also guiding how people read the drawing. More detail where you want attention, less detail where you don't. Keeping this hierarchy in mind makes the whole drawing feel much clearer and more intentional. Another thing that makes charcoal feel difficult is darkening everything. Charcoal powder gets dark very quickly. And a lot of the time, darkening everything is simply too much work. You end up doing way more than you need to. So instead of pushing all the shadows at the same time, it helps to work a bit less and a bit smarter. Just focus on where the darkness actually matters. Save the darkest darks for the focal point, and let the rest stay lighter and quieter. This way, the drawing reads better, and you don't exhaust yourself trying to control everything. Charcoal feels much easier to handle when you stop doing unnecessary work. Another thing that makes charcoal feel hard, especially for beginners, is drawing too much when practicing. A lot of the time, we feel like every practice session has to be a full portrait. Face, background, finished drawing, and that can get really exhausting. Practicing is actually most effective when it's simple and repeatable. It's really important to practice every day or as often as you can, but that doesn't mean you have to create a masterpiece every time you grab a pencil. A lot of the time, I'll just practice small studies. One eye, one nose, a hand, or even just simple forms and shadows. Do lots of experiments, textures, different tools, different papers. These kinds of studies take much less time, but they help you improve faster. They also remove a lot of pressure. So instead of thinking about finishing a drawing, think about learning one small thing. Over time, all these small practices add up, and when you do sit down to draw a full piece, it actually feels much easier. Another thing that can make charcoal feel harder than it needs to be is using too many tools. It's really easy to think that better drawings come from more tools, but a lot of the time, it actually slows you down. In this drawing here, I don't even use my Kneaded eraser, and I don't really use the makeup sponge that often either. I'm mostly just working with charcoal powder, an eraser, a charcoal pencil for details, and sometimes just my finger to move the charcoal around. Keeping the setup simple helps me keep the momentum going. I don't have to stop and think about which tool to use next. I can just focus on the drawing. So if charcoal feels overwhelming, try removing tools instead of adding more. Sometimes less tools actually give you more control. Paper size does matter here. In this drawing here, I'm using A2 drawing paper. This paper size might feel too big for some people. But when you're drawing with charcoal, this size is actually pretty common. Charcoal needs space to move around. If the paper is too small, everything feels cramped. It's harder to control values, harder to blend, and harder to correct mistakes. With a bigger paper, your arm can move more freely. You're not just drawing with your wrist anymore, and that alone makes charcoal feel much easier to handle. So if you're struggling to get clean results, try going a bit bigger with your paper. You don't have to jump straight to A2, but giving charcoal more space often gives you more control. And when you draw small, a 1mm difference is actually a lot. If the nose moves just 1mm, or the mouth shifts slightly, the whole face can feel off. So you have to be very precise. But on a bigger paper, 1mm is almost nothing. It's much more forgiving, you have more room to adjust and to correct, so try giving yourself a bit more space. And the next thing I want to talk about is drawing in one sitting. When all else fails, sometimes it's not the charcoal, it's you. Drawing for too long without a break is exhausting. Your eyes get tired, your hand gets stiff, your judgment gets worse. And the longer you push, the more mistakes you tend to make. At that point, adding more charcoal usually doesn't fix anything. So when things start to fall apart, it really helps to just stop. Take a break, walk away, come back later. Most of the time, the drawing is not as bad as you think it is. And when you return with fresh eyes, you'll often know exactly what to do. So if charcoal feels impossible, sometimes the best solution is not another tool, but a bit of rest. And in this drawing here, it might look like I'm working continuously, but I'm actually not. I worked on this drawing in 3 sittings. After I finished the initial block-in, I stopped for about 15 minutes. And then later, when I was approaching the detailing stage, I stopped again for around 30 minutes before continuing. And one last thing I want to say is to trust the process. I started this drawing from a really ugly stage. Nothing looked right. The proportions fell off. The values were confusing. The whole thing felt messy, but I didn't stop. I just kept working on it, slowly, small adjustments, small corrections. Sometimes I fixed one thing and broke another. But that's part of it. If you keep going, most mistakes are actually fixable. And even when they're not, you usually learn something from them. So when a drawing isn't working, it doesn't mean you failed. It usually just means you're in the middle of it. If you don't give up, things do start to come together. Maybe not all at once, but little by little. And eventually, the drawing finds its way to the finish. So trust the process, be patient with yourself, and keep going. And yeah, try to keep yourself inspired. Watching other people draw online really helps. Not to compare, but to remind yourself to keep practicing. Sometimes, just seeing someone else work is enough to get you started again. And if you want to follow along a bit more closely, I do have a longer, real-time, more raw version of this video up on my Patreon. You can watch the process and draw along at your own pace. So yeah, take your time, enjoy the process, and I'll see you in the next one.